please join me in welcoming Mike Frost.
During the Sri Lankan Civil War and then the Iraq War and as a result of the Afghanistan War, a whole bunch of refugees were finding their way through a pretty much like an underground railroad, just like you had here in the United States, like ferrying Muslim refugees down from Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, through northern India, into Burma, down to Indonesia, where they would then pay fishermen basically to sail them across the East Timor Sea to Australia, not to Australian mainland, but to an island between Australia and New Zealand, which is Australian sovereign territory. And then having made it to that island, Christmas Island it's called, they would then claim asylum. Tens and tens of thousands of people were finding their way on this extremely arduous and incredibly risky kind of journey to freedom, to the West, to the great Christian country of Australia, kind of founded and rooted in the values of English Christianity. And when they got there, they would find themselves then arrested, and our government had instituted a system of mandatory detention, so you're immediately arrested, even though, as I'm sure you're aware, to seek asylum in another country is not illegal. We would arrest them nonetheless. And then our government came up with a great idea to deter this from happening anymore. Rather than taking them to mainland Australia and processing them, determining whether they were actually refugees, and then going through a process with the UNHCR to resettle them, our government then sent them to 2 prison camps in the Pacific Ocean, one on the island of Nauru and one on an island which is a part of Papua New Guinea called Manus Island. And then we would do the most unspeakable thing to them. We would imprison them in these camps on these tiny islands literally in the middle of nowhere, and we would say to them, you will never, ever be set free from this incarceration. You'll never come to Australia. You'll never be granted access. It doesn't matter if you can prove your genuine refugee status. You will be here forever unless you accept a ticket to go back to Sri Lanka, Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, Iran. If you want to know what it looks like to take whole families, mothers and fathers and their kids, and put them into a camp and then literally wrench from them any sense of hope for a future whatsoever. If you want to see what that does to people, you could just go to Nauru or Manus Island. It's the most unspeakable way to treat people. I mean, even people who've committed crimes are given a sentence and they can check the days off on their calendars. Your children will never get an education. Your children will never have a career. Your children will never know their extended families or never be able to make extended families in a new free country. Our government then pulled down a big wall of secrecy over these 2 islands, and so reporters weren't admitted to the islands. No one was allowed to know what was going on. We had no clue what the conditions were like or what people were going through. Until a group of people who had worked with the Salvation Army and with the medical clinics on these islands conspired with the Guardian newspaper to release the medical reports. This is highly illegal and contravened all sorts of confidentiality agreements that they'd signed, but they released the medical reports, redacted with people's names obviously, so that we could see what kinds of conditions people were presenting themselves to the island medical clinics with. And then the Guardian newspaper published them online. They're called the Nauru Papers. And for the first time, we Australian taxpayers found out what our taxes are being used for. And effectively, it amounts to torture. There were stories of extreme examples of post-traumatic stress, depression, suicidal ideation, suicidal attempts. There were constant examples of sexual assault against women in the camps. There were examples of children attempting suicide. One of those reports that I read was about a little girl, 8 years old, who was compulsively swallowing stones in the exercise yard. And when asked why she was doing it, she said she thought that maybe she might die if she filled her stomach up with stones. Now, to conceive of an 8-year-old being suicidal is unconscionable. But to imagine that poor little darling going through the process of developing that strategy. Now, I've protested our government's actions time and again. I've marched, I've held placards, I've visited my local member of parliament. I've done all the stuff, I signed all the online petitions. But I remember reading the Guardian newspaper that day, and I felt such a palpable sense of outrage about this. I called some friends of mine, and I said, there's got to be something more we can do. I've visited enough politicians' offices. I've signed enough petitions. I've marched in the streets enough. It doesn't make any difference whatsoever. I mean, there are little children right now, just completely overwhelmed by hopelessness and wretchedness. How can we possibly, as citizens of this country, continue to allow this to be the case in our name? And so we came up with the most lame-brained protest that we could think of. A group of us, a Catholic nun, 2 Catholic priests, a uniting church, it's a bit like the United Methodist Church here, a Pentecostal, Baptist, put on our clerical garb, which is fine if you're all the other denominations, but us Baptists really suck in that department, I have to say. They said, just wear a black shirt. It's that's what I wear anyway, but okay. And we went to the Prime Minister of Australia's office. We walked into the office, into the waiting area. We announced that we were there to pray through the Nauru papers. We're just going to basically read them and pray for each person who's represented there. We're going to do it right here in the waiting area of the office. And the secretary said, look, you can't do that. I'm sorry, this is a public office. This is Commonwealth territory. You're not permitted to do that. That's against the law. And we said, well, we don't think praying for people in desperate need is against the law, so we're going to be doing it right here in the office. And before they could protest anymore, we went down on our knees and we began praying. Within 5 or 10 minutes, the Commonwealth Police arrived. 2 of them walked in. There we all were, Catholic nun, Catholic priest. They look great in their clerical outfits, by the way, I have to say. They've got it down. United Methodist, they had the collar. Oh, there's a couple of Anglicans I didn't mention. They're pretty good too. And then there's some bald guy in a black shirt. And we're praying. We're praying with tears running down our noses. We're crying out for this woman who'd been sexually assaulted by a guard. We're praying for this child who is swallowing stones. We're praying for this person here who's become catatonic and can no longer speak or get out of bed. We're just praying through these terrible, terrible reports. The police looked over at us and thought, there's some press outside and we do not want to be dragging an old nun out of this office. The bald guy with the black shirt, no problem. But the nun, no. So they said, and I remember overhearing them as we're praying. So they said, how long can these people pray for? But if you want to, if they're still here at 5 p.m. when you want to close up, give us a call back. So that's when I knew, this was about 10 a.m., that's when I knew I'm going to be praying all day until 5 p.m. I don't know if you've ever had this experience before. I didn't know any of these other ministers. I'd not met any of them before. But there's a strange kind of intimacy that develops when you are as brothers and sisters, not even introducing, well, we introduced ourselves, but not even finding out about each other. You are just in commonality around the values of the kingdom of God. You're praying for other people. And we did that all day. We prayed, we wept, we sang. And I've got to say too, I don't know what your liturgical kind of deal is in the Brethren in Christ, but us Baptists, we're pretty extemporaneous, right? We just make prayers up and string a bunch of songs together and stuff like that. But when you've got to pray all day, let me tell you, the liturgical traditions have got it way over us. It'd be like you get to a point, it's like, oh, we're running out of prayers. And the Catholics would say, well, let's pray the Hail Mary, Ave Maria. Like, oh, okay. And I'm like, I just mouth my words while that's going on. It's like, these guys just like had liturgy at their fingertips. They were singing, leading us in prayers. I mean, they really carried us through the afternoon session in particular. And as we got to like close until 5 p.m., the Uniting Church minister said to us, look, it's nearly 5 p.m. It looks like the police will be here soon and we'll probably be taken away. So why don't we close our time together by singing Amazing Grace? That one I knew, so I was like pretty cool with that. So I said, yeah, let's do that. And there was a kind of a sense in which we all said, like, it's been an honor to serve with you. Let's pray and I'll see you behind bars. And so we began to sing Amazing Grace. How sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. We didn't probably even get that far into the song when the big double doors burst open and in came like 15 police officers dressed in riot gear, like with jackets and like bulletproof vests and batons and guns and tasers and all this kind of jazz. And I was like, boys, seriously, I do not think the nun is going to give you that much trouble. And as they kind of swarmed into the room ready to arrest us all, it was kind of like this. They kind of stormed in ready to like arrest us, and they could hear Amazing Grace, and they all went like this. And they all kind of backed up against the room. So we're on our knees, we're singing Amazing Grace, and we're surrounded by the riot squad. And so as the first verse ends, you all know this, how it works. There's like half a beat before you start the second verse. So as the first verse ends, like they would all kind of prickle and like come to attention and like they'd all step forward, and then we'd start into the second verse, and then they'd all be like, and all step back again. I mean, this happened like verse after verse. Like at the end of every verse, they're all ready to arrest us, and then the next verse, they'd all step back again. Now, I only thought there were 4 verses in this song. But I think the Anglicans have invented like another dozen of them or something. They just kept singing this song over and over and over. And I was like, wow, I don't even know the words anymore. I'm now just moving my lips. And the police are moving forward and stepping back. And you've been laughing as I tell you this. And I've got to admit, I found this kind of comical too. There's a moment in which I kind of looked around the room and I thought, it's bizarre. It's like we're in a little protective bubble of amazing grace. It's like as long as the saints just keep singing, we can hold the riot squad at bay. It's only a bubble, though. It's not a shield, because they could burst through it any old time they like. But there's just this moment where the announcement of grace was allowed to rule the day. Until finally we ran out of verses. We sang the last word of the last verse, and we fell silent, and then the police stepped forward and announced to us that we're on Commonwealth property. We've been asked to leave. Will you leave? No, we said we won't leave. They said, then we need to arrest you in the name of the Commonwealth. And so we were each taken by the arm and lifted to our feet. I think it's different in the United States, but in Australia, you're only under arrest whilst ever a police officer is physically holding you. So a police officer grabs my elbow, lifts me to my feet, and leads me to the door, because I happen to be the closest to the door, so I'm the first one out. And as he gets to the door, in order to open the door, he lets go of my arm to push the doors open. Well, that now means I'm no longer under arrest. So I go back down and I get to my knees and start praying again. And he looks at me, he's like, oh, come on. Takes me by the arm and leads me out. And then he says this to me. He says, I came here at like 10 o'clock this morning. I was one of the guys that first arrived here. He said, have you been praying this whole time? I said, yeah, we have. No, he says, this is while he's walking me out to the police wagon. He said, no, he said, have you been praying all day? And when you think about it, people who don't pray at all, the whole idea of like praying all day, that seems gargantuan, doesn't it? I said, yes, I said, we've been praying and singing all day. And he said, why? And I said to him, why? I said, look, to my shame, it's because I don't know what else there is to do. It's like I've tried everything else that you can do. I've marched, I've signed, I've knocked on doors, I've held up placards, I've put up posters, I've posted on social media, I've raised a ruckus, I've tried everything that I could possibly do to announce to people that this is not the way God intends human beings to live. It's not God's intention that there should be war in the first place or that there should be refugees in the second place. It's not God's intention that people who say that they are followers of Jesus should lock them up and punish them simply because they want a better life for their children. And I don't know what else to do. I've tried it all. All I can do now is come to my Prime Minister's office and get to my knees and I can say, Lord Jesus, please help us to become the people you intended us to be. Help this to be the kind of world you wanted it to be. Invite us again into understanding all that you intend for this whole new way of being human, which is about justice and reconciliation and love and peace and mercy. And as he's loading me into the police van, he says, wow, he said, that's really beautiful. He said, I would like a world like that too. And I said, well, get in here with me. And he said, I don't want it that much. Seems like lots of people don't want it that much. Seems like lots of people might have slight skerricks of outrage or disappointment, but not so much that they imagine. That we, as the followers of the living God, we have been invited into this extraordinary new alternative kingdom, a whole new way of being human, modeled for us and explained to us by our friend, our brother, our Saviour, our rock, our Redeemer, Jesus. How could we ever be comfortable in a world of injustice and PTSD and rape and suicide? Well, of course, this was on the news because ministers getting arrested is a big deal in Australia. When finally I got home that evening, I pulled up outside our house and my neighbour across the road, Steve, who admitted to me later he had actually been waiting for me to get home so that he could ask me about this, kind of came running across the street. He said, I saw you on the news today. I said, yeah, no, I was. Was I on the news? Like, you were, yeah. He said, you were yelling at this police officer as they were carrying you out. I said, I was explaining the reign of God. He said, no, well, it looked like you were very animated while you were doing it. He said, this is a really big deal to you. Is this why you do this? I said, well, this is my mission, Steve. You know that. Yeah. He said, yeah, so your mission is to help refugees. I said, no, Steve, I've explained this to you before. My mission is to let people see what this new world that God has initiated and is unfurling throughout the world looks like. You see, friends, I don't think the mission of the church is to grow the church. I don't think the mission of the church is to champion church programs. I don't even think the mission of the church is to recruit more people to come to our churches. I think the mission of God's people is to alert everyone everywhere to the universal reign of God through Christ. I think the reign of God through Christ has been rooted in this world, and it is unfurling inexorably throughout history and around the world. And our task, as those people who have been birthed into this new kingdom through our faith in Jesus, our task is to give glory to our God, to alert people to the fact that God's reign is beautiful and just and is a place of reconciliation and hope and mercy. And I believe that if we do that effectively, sure, people will join our assemblies and sure, our church will grow and sure, good things like that will happen. But church growth is always a secondary or tertiary outcome for the people of God. Don't you agree? Church growth ought to emerge as a result of us doing what is our primary task, which is to alert people to the universal reign of God through Christ. At the very core of the mission of God's people is a thoroughgoing and completely uncompromising belief that our God reigns. You don't get to separate those theologically. People who believe in the reign of God are those who want to alert others to what that reign looks like. And this is not just a new covenant imperative. This has been the mission of God's people throughout all of history, has it not? That right throughout the Old Covenant, what was the mission of Israel? It was to alert all the nations that Yahweh reigns. Even when they are carried into exile in Babylon, even there, the prophet Isaiah, I know you say Isaiah, but it's actually Isaiah. The prophet Isaiah speaks into the life of the exilic community and says to them, how beautiful on the mountains are the feet of those who bring good news. Euangelizomai in Greek, if you translate it. How beautiful on the mountains of the feet, how beautiful on the mountains are the feet of the evangelists, he's saying. And then he tells us what the gospel of Israel is. How beautiful on the mountains are the feet of those who bring good news, who declare Yahweh reigns. Now think about that. These are not the mountains outside of Jerusalem. This is not Mount Zion. It's not how beautiful on Mount Zion are the feet of those who declare that Yahweh reigns. How beautiful on the mountains are the feet of those who declare Yahweh reigns. Which mountains is he talking about? He's talking about the mountains outside of Babylon. And what happens on mountains outside cities like Babylon? What happens in the high places in pagan nations in the ancient Near East? What happens in the mountains are fertility rites, sacrifices, pagan worship. What Isaiah is saying to the people of Israel is this: even though in captivity, even in the darkest places, in the darkest place, in your darkest experience of exile, even there, how beautiful are the feet of those foolhardy and brave enough to declare, Yahweh reigns. And then you think to yourself, what would the average Babylonian think in response to this? They would be like, your God reigns? Like, sorry, I kind of don't think it does. Because aren't you my slave? Aren't you captive in my land? Isn't your king under house arrest? Didn't we desecrate your temple? You have no temple, you have no king, you have no land, you are a no people, you are a nobody. Like, where do you get off saying that your God reigns? And the beauty of this, for me at least, is to remind myself that according to Scripture, even if all the evidence would appear to be to the contrary, it is still the task of the people of God to declare, our God reigns. So if the church in Pennsylvania is smaller this year than it was last year, our God reigns. If your churches are closing at a greater rate than they've ever done before in history, our God reigns. If there's apathy or disinterest, if there's self-centeredness and consumerism and materialism affecting our churches, our God reigns. Our belief in the reign of God is not based on whether we see evidence of that. It's based on our thoroughgoing commitment to the Word of God and to believe that what God says is true, that He is King and ruler over all the universe, that His reign is utter and complete and total. It is unchallenged. It is confirmed for us, demonstrated and confirmed, set in motion, spilling out from Israel to the whole world through the life and the teaching and the death and resurrection of Jesus. Our God reigns. Our task is to alert our neighbours to what that world looks like. That world does not just look like eternal worship services. That world does not just look like great churches and comfortable seating. And don't mishear me, I've got no problem with comfortable seating. It's way better than uncomfortable seating. I've got no problem with big churches or with worship services. Don't hear me say I've got a problem with any of that, but that's not the extent of the reign of God, right? Your job is to not alert people how cool your worship services are. Your job is to show people what the reign of God looks like. Because they're like Babylonians and they're saying, I kind of don't think so. Like, what is this world in which God reigns? What does this look like? Because all I hear about is like mega church ministers and wearing the wrong sneakers, and all I hear about is like, sex scandals and financial scandals in churches, and all I hear about is the church, completely capitulating in all sorts of ways to their values. That's all I see. Our task, should we choose to accept it, is to sit in the gutter with your neighbour, Steve, from across the road and explain to him why you're not some lefty, do-good social justice warrior. You're willing to get arrested for the poorest and most vulnerable people in the world because this is what the reign of God looks like, Steve. It looks like a place at the table for everyone. It looks like love and healing and reconciliation. The mission of God's people is to alert everyone everywhere to the universal reign of God through Christ. A reign which is now not just Israel's to declare, but people from every nation and every tongue. So in this respect, we live between these two worlds. Between the world where we take by faith that the reign of God is utter and total and complete. But in the present reality, we only experience that reign fitfully, partially, and mysteriously. There are moments in which we really sense the grace and the beauty and the power of the reign of God, right? It's fitful in our experience. It's partial. We experience the glory of God, but not all the glory of God. We experience the healing from Christ, but not all the healing from Christ. And it's mysterious because we ask ourselves all the time, do we not? Why, when I prayed this prayer for that person, they were healed, but the same prayer for this person and they weren't? Why is your church exploding in South America and Southern Africa and Southeast Asia and not in North America or Australia? It's mysterious to know what the reign of God is like or where it is or how it's unfurling. That's our reality. Fitful, partial, mysterious, but don't ever please lose sight of the fact that we by faith believe it is total, utter, and complete. I was teaching my students this, that a thoroughgoing belief in the reign of God is absolutely central to any understanding of the mission of God's people. I explained this like total, utter, and complete thing and then the fitful, partial, mysterious thing. And one of my students said, could it kind of be like this? And he kind of gave this illustration. And it's a kind of tortured illustration at certain points, and it can't explain everything. There is something kind of quite beautiful about it. He said, could it be like this? Could it be like you have found yourself in a derelict house? It's like it's been like inhabited by homeless people and rats and bats and small creatures. It's like it's just a completely derelict home. And you're locked in a particular room in that home. And it looks like someone's burnt the mattress in that room, and the walls are covered in soot and grime and filth and years of neglect. There's cobwebs and darkness everywhere. It's filthy, completely and utterly filthy. The window is utterly coated with grime and filth and soot. He said, imagine you're in that room with somebody, and right outside that room right now, bursting over the horizon, is the most magnificent sunrise you have ever seen in your life. Like, try and picture this. The sky, which has been black, is turning deep blue, orange and red. Light is refracting through low-hanging clouds. The field between here and there is verdant green. It's the most magnificent, breathtaking sunrise you've ever seen. How much of that sunrise would you be able to see while trapped inside this room? Well, just the faintest of glows coming through the grime-covered window, right? He said, imagine that you're in that room with someone who's never seen a sunrise. This is where it gets a little bit weird, but just stay with me. Just imagine you're in that room with someone who's never, ever seen a sunrise. And you say to that person, hey, do you know what that kind of orangey sort of glow is that happens about this time every single day? No, says the other guy, I've always been wondering, what is that? Well, that's a sunrise. Can I explain to you what a sunrise is? And you would describe that sunrise. But eventually, even you may describe it really powerfully, like I just did before. Did you like that light refracting through low-hanging clouds thing? Or, the verdant green, I'm quite the wordsmith, right? You could describe it all to them. But eventually, wouldn't you find yourself thinking, it's just the words don't quite do it. What would you need to do? Now, whenever I've posed this question to different countries, in Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the UK, Germany, all sorts of places, and I say, what would you need to do when the words wouldn't quite do it and you needed to show what a sunrise looked like? People in those countries all say, well, you should clean the window. But in the United States, they say, well, you should smash that window. It's good. I like Americans. And we're not going to smash the window. Let's just say we're not allowed to smash the window. And then I get thinking about this. I was thinking, actually, wanting to smash the window is actually a pretty good thing. But here's the deal. We don't get to smash the window. When Christ returns, the window is blown right out of its frame. In the here and now, the best we get to do is to clean the window. And you know what it's like when you're trying to clean a window which is completely grime covered? You can't just wipe it and it's clean. You're just smearing the grime around, aren't you? You might spit on the window and with your elbow you could kind of clean this a little hole and a shaft of light would burst through it. Folks, this is what the mission of God's people is like, is it not? The reign of God is the sunrise. It's perfect. You can't add to it. You don't extend the reign of God. Did you know that? You can't. It's sublime and perfect and utter and total. It's like the most breathtaking sunrise you have ever seen. But you are in this present age, in the locked and darkened room. When we're trying to alert people to what the reign of God looks like, we can describe it, we can use words, we can talk about it. But eventually we need to say, sometimes the words just don't go, here, let me show you. Let me show you what the reign of God looks like. You, my friends, you're spiritual window cleaners. Your job is to run around your neighborhood and to clean the windows of your neighbors' lives, to allow the shafts of the reign of God to burst through. Not all of it. You don't get to smash the window. We still see through a glass darkly. It's still fitful, partial, and mysterious. But you will become lights in your neighborhood. You will become emblems of people who by faith refuse to abandon belief that the sunrise is perfect, that the reign of God is unfurling, that the kingdom of God will be seen one day when every knee shall bow and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is King, the King of the reign of God. Do you follow what I'm saying? So I can't help but end up in a place talking with you. And I hope that you won't be offended by this, but I can't help but ask, what would your neighbours be able to tell me about the reign of God from an observation of your life? Or what would your neighbours be able to tell me about the reign of God by an observation of the life of your church or congregation? Or what would they know about the reign of God? And invariably, most people, whenever I ask this question to them in a more seminar kind of setting, would say probably not much at all. I had one woman, a student of mine, who took this question so seriously. She lives in a little cul-de-sac. She's lived there, raised her kids there. They've been there forever, as well as all their other neighbours. They know them really well, got great relationships with them. They're a really kind of tight crew. She went back to her neighbours and she said to them, hey, listen, my professor's just raised this question, so I thought I'd ask you, what do you know about, and the way she put it was, what do you know about my faith, my religion, based on what you've observed from my life? And she said, these are my friends. Like these people really like me. She said, you know what the number one answer was? Well, like you're really, really busy, they said. You're always driving in and out and heading off to church things and doing church ministries and meetings. So, like, you're pretty busy. It just broke her heart. It's like, do you think in the age to come, when the window is blown out and we see what we've only been seeing fitfully, partially, mysteriously, we now see utterly, totally, and completely, do you think we're going to be like super busy? If busyness is all they see of us, if the disconnection from neighbourhood life and orientation around some other group somewhere that lives or meets in some other building, some other place is all they see. For them, when you say to them, I am an agent of God, helping people to see what the reign of God looks like, that's what they think you'll be doing. Whereas you know as well as I do, when Jesus spoke to us about the reign of God, what was it like? It was a place where the last would be first. What was the reign of God like? It was a place where there would be enough for everyone. What would the reign of God look like? It would be a place where we would be at one with each other and at one with the living God. What does the reign of God look like? A banquet, a party. What would people know of the reign of God simply from observation of your life or your church's life? And another way of putting that question is, let's face it, if we took your church and we pulled it out of your neighbourhood, would anyone in that neighbourhood even notice? Other than the neighbours who are now not like seeing their street fill up with cars on Sundays. Would their lives be any the poorer because of it? Or would they say to themselves, whoa, no, wait, what? They've all gone? How will we know what love looks like now? How would we understand justice or peace or mercy without them? My friends, the word church, this whole idea of the called out ones or the assembly of called out ones, that term was in use before the Christians got hold of it, before Jesus even used it. That term generally was used to describe a gathering at the city gate of the elders of a local community or town. It kind of worked like this. When guys got to a certain age, where their sons were now men, and of course, if you're getting married as a teenager, having your sons straight away, you could be like in your 40s when this is the case. You're now an elder. You hand over the family business to your adult son. He takes over the running of the farm or the local business or whatever it might be. What are you going to do now? Well, I'll tell you what you do now. When there's a big job on or harvest time or so, you step in and you help. But lots of what you do is, as an elder, you go and you sit down at the city gate with all the other elders of the village. And they don't just sit down there and chew the fat and talk about politics and football or whatever the case may be. Elders actually performed a very significant function in the life of a congregation. You see, whenever there was an ethical or moral challenge in the life of the community, we would go to our elders and we would put it to them. We would say, there's a drought. How are we to deal with this? The Smiths are fighting with the Joneses. How should we respond to this? And elders would actually kind of muse on how to respond to it. In fact, I've spoken to a missionary who's worked in the Middle East. He says, oh yeah, he said, these gatherings are really extraordinary. They all kind of sit around and they scratch their white beards and they talk and laugh. And then when a question is posed to them, it's kind of like no one supplies the answer straight up because they're going to try and make this conversation last all day. So if the Smiths and the Joneses are fighting with each other and it comes to the elders and elder number one says, well, you should apologise and then you should pay them back and then you should sit down and have a meal together and sort it all out. All the other elders are like, oh, come on, it's like only 9:30 in the morning. Like, we've been talking about this for a long time, right? Each elder would just like throw in a bit of the answer to allow the conversation to kind of marinate and gestate until kind of wisdom appears and then it's presented to the people of the community. You kind of see little hints of this in the Gospels. Do you remember when a guy goes to Jesus and says to Jesus, Rabbi, tell my brother to divide our inheritance with me? And Jesus says, who made me your rabbi? There's a sense in which what this man is doing is he's going outside of his own village. He's sourcing a freelance elder and saying, you know, like, would you rule on this so I can take it back to my brother and kind of force him to capitulate to like whatever the ruling might be. And Jesus' disinterest in this is say, who made me? Who put me in charge of you? It's his way of saying, no, these things happen in community. You take these things to your own elders and then your own elders have to live with whatever advice they've given. You don't get to outsource that to me. You don't get to use me as some freelance rabbi. But just in case that's the end of it, here, wait, stop. I've got a story to tell you. And you always knew you were in trouble when Jesus was telling you a story against you. Well, the word that was used to describe the gathering of those elders was ecclesia. The ecclesia gathered at the city gate. It was the repository of wisdom and grace and a commitment to the common good. It was the source of beauty and truth for communities in the ancient Near East. I find it fascinating that Jesus should take that word and use it to describe his followers. He modifies it. Paul modifies it even further. But at its core, the notion was that the followers of Jesus would be the called out ones, filled now with the wisdom of the reign of God, the teaching of Jesus, as a gift or a blessing to their community, to their neighbours. So the followers of Jesus ought to be the people to whom the community goes to say, help us. Help us, we're broken. Help us, we're tearing ourselves apart. Now, folks, when your neighbourhood comes to you and asks you to help them with their healing, then you know you've really got this whole missional thing working. It doesn't matter how cool your meeting is, where you meet, what your preaching's like. When your neighbours come to you as the ecclesia and say, help us, repository of wisdom and truth, you'll know you are beginning to get traction as a missional community in the life of that neighbourhood. It's happened on a few occasions to me. We planted a church in Manly, the seaside community that Heather was mentioning before. We loved and served. We put ourselves on all sorts of council committees. We involved ourselves in the local community in considerable ways. I could talk about it for ages, but I won't here. Till we got to the point where the mayor called me one day and she said, did you know that our town has the highest incidence of alcohol-related violence in the whole of the state? And you could not live in our town and not know that. So I said, yeah, I do know that. She said, do you know that we are spending millions of dollars every year, extra police, security guards, CCTV cameras, education programs, you name it, trying to change the culture of our town centre? One of the things that our town did, like way back in the 70s, was they paved over the high street and they turned it into a pedestrian mall. And then there are pubs all the way down the high street. So now there's no cars driving through, it's a pedestrian mall, and pubs have 24-hour trading on weekends in Australia. So just kind of, You don't have to be smart to figure this out. If you've got pubs up and down a pedestrian mall and you ply with them alcohol 24 hours a day, these people are going to pour out of those pubs into a confined area where someone's going to bump into somebody else or hit on somebody else's girlfriend or turn around or look at them the wrong way, and boom. This is like violence. One of the local police officers said, this is like New Year's Eve every single weekend. It's hell. It's horrible. So the mayor rings me and she says, we have tried everything and we've spent millions of dollars. It hasn't made one bit of difference to the culture in the high street. And she said, after all that you guys have been doing in our neighbourhood, she said, I don't know why I didn't think about this before, but it just occurred to me, maybe the Christians might have something to offer us. She said, do you guys have a response to how we could deal with alcohol-related violence in our community? And I said, of course we do. I've been wondering, why haven't you asked us before now? Like, thank you for asking, because of course we've got a response to that. She said, this is fantastic. She said, look, I'm going away next week, and I think I was away the week after that, so we kind of scheduled it for like a couple of weeks' time for her and I to meet, for me to kind of present like this Christian strategy for dealing with alcohol-related violence. And then I hung up the phone and I said to Jesus, I've got no clue, Jesus, how we're going to deal with alcohol-related violence. Because, you know what the classic Christian response is? It's like, stop 24-hour trading. Like, put the pubs out of business. Like, of course, your neighborhood loves you when you do that, especially the publicans. It's like, yeah, that just seems like so kind of conventional, and there's got to be a much more creative way of doing this, a more kingdom way of doing this. So I called all the ministers in town. We had a meeting. And I was like, guys, this is everything that us missional people are into. It's like we serve our community. We partner them. We build relationships with them. We go deep with them. And then they respond and they ask us, help us, heal us. It's like, to me, this is like a missional orgasm. It's just like, this is the thing. Like, this is what I've been waiting for. So, like, I've got a meeting with her in a couple of weeks' time. I've got to take to her, like, a kingdom of God response to this. So, come on, help me. What are we going to do? And, of course, like, they were put on the spot, but they were like, gee, I don't know. And, like, try and reduce trading hours, yeah, that just puts you in a combative relationship with the local business community, and more education programs. Oh, I don't know about that. And in the end, somebody suggested, I know what we could do. We could have every Saturday night in the high street, in the pedestrian mall, we could have a top quality Christian music concert, alcohol-free. It'd be like Salt and Light. We would be there having just the most awesomest fun with this top quality Christian music, showing everyone in the pubs, this is what good, clean living looks like. Now, I don't want to sound like I'm super skeptical or anything, folks, but I was like, this is just not really resonating with my spirit, I said. They said, no, it'll be top. One guy said, I know one of the top Christian opera singers in Australia. And I was like, okay, I wasn't even sure what top quality Christian music was to begin with, but I'm pretty sure that's not going to do the trick. And then someone says, I know some guys who play in a Christian rock band. And I kept probing this solution. I said, what time will the top quality Christian concert in the high street be held on a Saturday night? What time would it be held, folks? Like 7:30, 8 p.m.? How much top quality Christian music are we going to play? Like, how long can it go for? How many songs has this opera singer got up his sleeve? Like, is it going to go for an hour? Is it going to go for like 2 hours maybe? Like, if we stretch it out, like a couple of hours of this top quality Christian music. So that would be like, say we start at 8, that would be like at 10, would we finish at 10 p.m.? And then, we've got to pack down, and, in our alcohol-free kind of joyousness, we can kind of be a testament to the good, clean living of the kingdom, and people would see how much fun we're having. But we could hang around there. Like, how long would we be there? Could we be there till like 11 maybe? Do you know when my neighborhood goes to hell? 1, 2, 4 a.m. And where are all the top quality Christian concert goers going to be? In bed. And those who are clergy are going to be up for work the next day. And I'm like, I can't go to her about this. In fact, the last straw for me was when one of them said, well, they're already spending millions of dollars on this. Maybe we could hit them up for the money to kind of pay the bands and the PA system and the stage and all that. And I was like, I can't go to the mayor and say, could you give us money so we could put on a top quality Christian concert? I don't even want to go to a top quality Christian concert. No offense. The person whose idea it was like threw some papers, like, well, you're so smart, like, what do you think we should do? I was like, I've got no idea what we should do. So I thought, I just have to consult the oracle. So I went to Google and I typed in Christian responses to alcohol-related violence. And guess what? In the United Kingdom, there's a group of people called street pastors. They go out into the high street, into the entertainment precincts. They wear these big jackets because it's England and it's freezing, and on the back it says, street pastor, like right across their back. In the summer they have t-shirts, street pastor. It's like as uncool as it could possibly be. And they go out from midnight until 6 a.m. every Saturday night, and they go into the high street or into the entertainment precinct, and they just do three things. It's not evangelistic, it's not preaching, there's no top quality Christian music. All they do is they listen, help, and care. So if some kid is crying her eyes out because her boyfriend's hitting on some girl in the pub there, you sit in the gutter and you listen to her story. If someone's like in the UK where they come out of the clubs and they've got these high heels on and they're tottering around, their feet are killing them, they hand out these disposable flip-flops for them to wear home. They just listen, help, and care. If some guy can't find his way down to where the taxi rank is, you put your arm around him and you walk him down to the taxis. You just listen, help, and care. And it's been reducing alcohol-related violence, look. And they're like, yeah, but like you got to go out between like 1 a.m. and 6 a.m. Who's going to do that? I was like, I know you're not going to do that because you've got the communion service at 8 a.m. I totally get that. But how would you feel if I pitched it to the members of your congregation? So we held a public meeting in the biggest church in the high street, the Anglican church. Hundreds of Christian people showed up, and I pitched to them street pastors. I've never been a street pastor. I'm only reading about it on the internet. I'm showing slides with pictures of street pastors. Look at these beautiful jackets you get to wear, I said. All you go out is in pairs in twos, in pairs, and you just fan out and you listen, help, and care. And somebody at the back, a woman said, so this is for young people to do. I said, no, I've been reading on the internet that the most effective street pastors are women over the age of 55. Because when two guys are squaring off at each other in the high street, nothing changes the mood like your nana coming over and saying, hi boys, are you having a good night tonight? It's not law and order. We don't break up fights. We don't preach. We listen, help, and care. I need hundreds of Christians to sign up so I can put us on a roster so that no one has to go out every Saturday night. We're just going to fan throughout the high street and try and change the culture here. Who wants to do it? I had 200 people sign up on the first day. I went back to the mayor. I felt like such a big deal, I've got to say. I was like, I can put 200 people on the streets like next week. In really cool t-shirts that say, street pastor. She's like, I'll pay for the t-shirts. I said, you're on, you pay for the t-shirts. 200 people put themselves on a roster. Eventually it became more than 200. And then people would go out in pairs, sit in gutters, walk guys home, help people get on taxis. They just listen, help, and care. Within 6 months, alcohol-related violence was reduced by 1/3. Now it's been reduced by 2/3. Now, if you'd asked me, could you think of a really cool way to alert people to the universal reign of God? I would not have come up with that idea. But in my view, in the reign of God, people do not get drunk on a Saturday night and beat the living shit out of each other. In the reign of God, people are not having sex in public places. In the reign of God, there is not abuse and fear and anger In the reign of God, we drink and we eat. Jesus taught me that. We celebrate. We live life to the full, but it doesn't look like that. Now, some of the pastors are a bit concerned that this was not an evangelistic strategy. Like, don't we get to preach about Jesus? It's like, no, we don't. We listen, help, and care. But my friends, I can promise you, every single Saturday night, when you go out, you will talk about Jesus. Because here's how it goes. I've done it enough now to know exactly the routine. People will see you with your ridiculous T-shirt on, and they say, "Street pastor, you're a pastor, are you? Like, are you a fettuccine or are you a spaghetti?" It's like, I've only heard that every single night for the last 5 years, but and then here's what they say. They all say it. They say, "Your churches are full of people who want to abuse little kids, aren't they? You abuse children, don't you? You're all pedophiles, aren't you?" You just smile and nod. "No, we're not." But, well, you hate gay people, don't you? You hate them. You just hate gay people. Why do you hate gay people so much? You hear this over and over and over every Saturday night, more abusively as the night goes on. But here's what happens. In the crowd, there's lots of bravado and lots of yelling and pushing and shoving. And then as the crowd kind of moves on to the next pub they're going to, usually someone hangs back and they say, "No, but seriously, like my uncle was abused by a priest back before I was born. What is with that in you guys?" Or they'll say, "My sister got kicked out of youth group because she's gay. Why do you people do that?" And I can promise you, you sit in the gutter and you talk to them about the reign of God. You talk to them about the love of Jesus. You talk to them about the grace that God has revealed to us and that which he asks us to reveal to the rest of the world. We led a young guy to Christ and he signed up as a street pastor. And I remember him saying to me one Saturday night, usually we'd go to a party or at someone's house. It's like, "Oh, do you want a drink?" It's like, "I can't drink. I'm on street pastors tonight." And everyone's all like, because it's hard going out 1 a.m. to 6 a.m. So I was like, "Oh, sorry about that." And one young guy, this guy we'd led to Jesus who just signed up, he said, you go out in the rain, you go out in the cold. It doesn't get as cold as Pennsylvania, but still, it's cold for us. And every week I think, I don't want to be a street pastor tonight. And I pray to Jesus this prayer: "Jesus, I am totally over this. So if you want me to keep doing this next week or the week after or whenever I'm next rostered on, you'd better make sure something really extraordinary happens tonight." And he said, "Every bloody night something extraordinary happens. I heal somebody, I drive demons out of somebody, I tell somebody all about the gospel, every single night. It's crazy." And there are sometimes, he said, I'll get to 5:30 a.m. as the shift is nearly over. I'm like, yes, I'm off the hook. And it's right at the end of the morning. Dang it, something extraordinary happened. Friends, what does the reign of God look like in your neighborhood? In my neighborhood, it looks like street pastors. It looks like curbing violence. It looks like giving voice to the voiceless refugee community on Nauru. What does the reign of God look like in your community? What does justice look like? What does love look like? What does reconciliation look like? What does justice seeking and peacemaking look like? My friends, we need to be raising up generation after generation of followers of Jesus who can go into the darkest places, in the darkest mountains, in the darkest parts of Babylon, and who can declare, "Our God through Christ reigns." And I can explain that to you all you like, but can I also show you what it looks like? This is the mission of God's people. Do you follow? To give glory to King Jesus and to announce to your neighbours, there is a better way to be human than the way you're doing it now. Peace.